Awesome. Thank you so much, Sydney. Right now, we're going to have Joanna Marsh joining us. Joanna, it's been some time since we last got to chat. I'm excited about this one this morning. What's going on with the rail industry right now?
So it's kind of a crazy time. There have been a lot of service disruptions in the form of delays and congestion, and Union Pacific and BNSF have had to work with customers to try to remove some of their private rail cars on the network, just to kind of free up the network a little bit and kind of get things moving a little bit more. So, but it is a crazy time right now.
Looking at the letter the senator sent, it looks like they're using a little bit of tough language here. What are they trying to demand? What's the end state for just sending this thing out?
Sure. So the Surface Transportation Board held a hearing in late April in which shippers groups and unions and the railroads got together to discuss what's going on. Like, why do we have this really bad congestion? Why do we have these delays? And you've heard stories from the shippers groups about how, like, for instance, like for agricultural interests, they can't get their products, and they can't get their mills they can't get their products like in and out of factories and mills, and so they've had to sort of curtail production or even kind of slow production down. And one of the pilot executives actually spoke at that hearing and was saying, he's concerned that the railroads will be able to deliver the diesel additive that they need. And if they can't deliver that diesel additive, then then it'll create this chain effect where they won't be able to, that the trucks won't be able to get the diesel, of course. And so it's pretty bad. But to be fair, the railroads are really trying to improve their service metrics, and the Surface Transportation Board has told them to report service metrics on a regular basis and meet with board staff to discuss how things are coming along.
And Joanna, any insights to what the reaction to the rail carriers have been so far?
Yeah, so the rail carriers have, acknowledged that, that there are service problems, and like many others, there's been a staffing shortage. And essentially, what has happened is when volumes came back up, the railroads didn't have the adequate staffing to be able to match those volumes and to get things moving smoothly. And some have blamed precision schedule railroading as a key reason for why there haven't been the employment levels needed to match that market demand. The railroads have said, well, it's the pandemic. It's been the pandemic, and it's just everyone else is having these hiring problems, and so the railroads are saying they're really trying hard, aggressively recruiting train engineers and train conductors to help run the trains. And of course, you have other people saying that we need staff to help maintain the trains and maintain the track as well. So it's so hopefully it'll work itself out here in the next several months.
Perfect. And one final question here while we have you on, looking at, moving forward, potential things or escalations by Congress. Now we see the letter. Do you personally feel like this could possibly lead to more, or is this kind of a warning shot, so to speak?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it's interesting because the U.S. House Subcommittee on Railroads, Pipelines, and Hazardous Materials also held a hearing recently on the reauthorization of the Surface Transportation Board. And House representatives were asking, does the STB need more authority to get things done? And Chairman Marty Oberman said, no, I think we have what we need, but we could certainly use the help of the resources of Congress. And also, there's been some discussion about, let's see, just trying to work things out. So it's yeah, we'll see how it goes.
Awesome, Joanna. Thanks so much for joining us. Our staff writer, Alva from Washington, D.C., we appreciate your insights, and we'll check in with you as the situation continues to develop.
Thank you.
Up next, we're going to bring on another rail expert, Mike Bottomdis, who's going to talk about this situation going on as well. Mike, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
No problem. Good to see you guys.
Good to see you as well. So, Mike, jumping into this, picking up where Joanna left off, what are some of your takeaways from this?
Well, one takeaway is who says there's no bipartisanship in Washington, D.C. anymore? We found that issue that Republicans and Democrats can agree on, I guess. This was signed by 19 senators in 13 states, including senators you think would not agree on anything. Tammy Duckworth from Illinois and Marco Rubio from Florida. Like, what else would they agree on other than that rail service has been poor? So I'm sure Marty Oberman, the chairman of the Surface Transportation Board, loved the letter. He agreed with it. We know from his statements. I think he's going to use this as ammunition to demand all the rail service data, and maybe at some point go further than that. We'll see what ultimately happens. I don't know what's ultimately going to happen. Maybe at some point there's a revised way to contest rates, other than the cumbersome process that currently takes place. But really, the rail service and at some point pricing too has just become a much bigger political football than it ever was before. You go back a few years, and the only senators that would bother to say anything about this would be like Al Franken from Minnesota and maybe Rockefeller from West Virginia. But now you have this coalition of the coal states, bunch of agriculture states, Louisiana, the chemical industry, and Florida, which you don't think of that as being a rail shipper other than the ports and maybe oranges. But almost a shout out to Marco Rubio, who is the only senator to sign this from a state where a Class 1 railroad is headquartered. He is from Miami, and CSX is headquartered in Jacksonville. So it's almost like North Florida against South Florida. But I think all this is interesting. I think it puts pressure on the STB, but I think Marty Oberman wanted that pressure and wants this as ammunition to demand more from the railroads.
It feels like, these things are regulated by the NTSB, the board, but does this put executives for these Class 1 railroads between a rock and a hard place? Not only are they mandated to have certain service levels and such and regulated, but at the same time, they're going to face activist pressure for profits if they don't do things a certain way. Do you think that there is a possible way out, or is this going to be a situation that's really going to put a squeeze on the Class 1s?
Well, I think they have to balance those two things more than they have in the past. I think the last however many years, the railroads' primary focus was improving the margin, improving the return on invested capital, getting the stock price up. Now if you have operating ratios in the, let's say mid 50s, at some point, companies are, the STB looks at that and says, well, you're profitable enough, even as capital intensive as you are. So the railroads are going to have to do more in terms of staffing, having maybe some redundancy in terms of equipment, having some extra capacity at terminals, more passing sidings than they need. So they are going to have to balance those two interests. The activists, looming over the horizon is going to be an issue, but the railroads, I think, are going to make these investments while looking sideways and saying, well, we can't have our operating ratio look any worse than the industry average. Otherwise, we know the playbook of the activists. They take the worst operating ratio in the industry. They apply what the best is from whatever other railroad and say, oh, this is how much shareholder value is left on the table.
And Mike, you alluded to it a little bit earlier, talking about this wasn't really a highly talked about situation, but can you talk to the history of some of these issues that were spoken about around the issues around the rail segment right now?
Yeah, sure. So the shippers have historically, had a hard time contesting, rates. And basically, I mean, ever since the railroads have been, deregulated, it's been a situation where the railroads have abandoned tracks that they didn't want to maintain. There's been a tremendous amount of consolidation. No one wants to go back to 1970s where the railroads were going, bankrupt. But the railroads have steadily increased rates since, let's say, 2004, when they finally got their, realized that they had pricing leverage. And it seems like, many are of the view that the pendulum has swung too far in the direction of the railroads, and shippers really don't have a lot of recourse when they're not getting good service and still being asked for a 5% or so rate increase, sometimes more than that. And a lot of these shippers don't have another option because they're bulk shippers, and there's no river there. They can't use a barge. The trucking is just not economical. All they can do is a railroad. At best, there's going to be two in most cases. In a lot of cases, there's just one railroad. So, and most shippers, are not of the size and capability to contest those rates in the court, because the process for doing that is too cumbersome. It involves building a standalone railway. So, what I'd like to see is them, come up with a streamlined process for contesting rates, and so small shippers can do that as well. And even just the threat of shippers bringing more rate cases, I think, will reduce the level of inflation in rail rates and improve service levels.
Thank you so much, Mike. We're going to continue to watch as this situation develops, and we really do appreciate you coming on, providing some excellent commentary as well.
No problem. Good to see you guys.
Now it's about to be time to throw it over to the board here with Tony Mulvey and Donnie Gilbert. It is our first carrier update here on Freightwaves Meow.